Not every mystery begins with a crime. Sometimes it starts with a sneeze. On a misty London morning, a quiet house did something no one expected it. Sneezed. Not once, but over and over again. Windows rattled like lungs, gasping for air. Doors creaked as if coughing, and the strange sound echoed through the empty halls. Neighbors were puzzled. Officials were baffled. And soon, Sherlock Holmes was called in to investigate a house that seemed alive. Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, Holmes faces one of his strangest investigations yet. A house that sneezes, and a trail of clues that leads to something far more unexpected than anyone imagined. Stay with me till the end, because the explanation behind this bizarre mystery isn't just clever, it's astonishing. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a mystery, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing detectives from all over the world join the hunt. So, pick up your cup of tea and get comfortable, because today's case is worth every second until the very end. Chapter 1. The Impossible Crime. It was during one of those restless March mornings when the fog clung low over Baker Street like a damp shroud that I first heard of the peculiar affair that would soon become known, albeit briefly, in the presses, the Sneeze House tragedy. I had been examining my medical journals in a half-hearted bid to escape the gray monotony outside, when Holmes suddenly stirred from his Persian slipper and reached for his violin without a word. The somber drone of a G minor chord lingered in the air as a sharp knock rapped against our door. Holmes paused mid-bow. "Enter," he said, without moving. The door opened to reveal Inspector Lestrade, his expression more sour than usual, and his boots leaving muddy imprints on our rug. "Well, gentlemen," he said grimly, "I believe I've found something that will either amuse you greatly or leave you entirely baffled." "Let us hope for the latter," Holmes muttered, setting down the violin. "Amusement is fleeting. Bafflement, on the other hand, sharpens the mind." Lestrade held up a folded slip of paper. A telegram from Suffolk. A death in a sealed house, locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. And yet, he paused dramatically. The entire house was sneezing. Holmes tilted his head. "Sneezing. That's what the telegram says." Local constable's words, not mine. Lestrade handed him the message. Holmes scanned it once, then twice. He raised his eyebrows. Dr. Harwood was found dead in the drawing room. Doors and windows locked. No visible wounds. House emits odd sounds like sneezing at irregular intervals. Villagers refuse to enter. Await instructions. Holmes looked up. "Curious. You'll come?" Lestrade asked. "Hopeful." Holmes stood. "Naturally, Watson. We leave within the hour. Pack warm clothing. It seems we're headed to a haunted house, or worse, one with a head cold." The journey to Suffolk was marked by a steady drizzle and a general sense of unease. The countryside had not yet shaken off the chill of winter, and the narrow roads leading to the village of Worsley Heath were slick with mud. By the time our carriage pulled up before the so-called house that sneezed, the last of the light was fading. It was a lopsided Georgian manor, standing alone at the edge of a moor, surrounded by an overgrown garden and a low stone wall. The windows were shuttered tightly, and yet the structure somehow conveyed an air of irritation. As we approached, a low, rhythmic sound echoed faintly from within. "Ah-choo, ah-tosh, dash, choo." Watson and I exchanged glances. "Someone is inside," I said. Lestrade shook his head. "We've checked. No one. That sound's been going on since morning. It's mechanical. We think core, some trick of acoustics. But every constable we've sent in came out claiming it's cursed." Holmes crouched by the door. It was bolted from the inside, the key still in the lock. He examined it without touching it. No scratches, no tampering. He moved to the nearest window. Fastened, curtains drawn. "Tell me, how was the body discovered?" "The caretaker came by with a delivery, man milk and parcels." No one answered. "They heard the sneezing and got nervous. Called in the constable. He broke the cellar window to climb in. Found Dr. Harwood seated upright in a chair." "Dead as stone, upright, you say?" Holmes' voice had that gleam of excitement I knew well. "Yes, and completely untouched. No signs of poison, no struggle, no wounds. The fireplace ashes were cold, but there was fresh tea in the cup beside him." Holmes nodded slowly. "Where is the body now?" "In the stable, under lock and key. The villagers refused to keep it in the chapel." "Bring me to it." Inside the stable, under a canvas sheet, lay the late Dr. Harwood, a man of about 60, with a distinguished face and a large, sharp nose. His expression was almost peaceful, save for the slight widening of the eyes that suggested surprise. His hands were folded neatly in his lap. Holmes leaned in, sniffed the collar of the man's shirt, then opened the doctor's mouth and examined the gums, nostrils, and ears with quiet precision. "Fascinating," he murmured. "No petechia in the eyes, no bloating. And yet," he turned to Lestrade, "I require access to the house immediately. I believe, Inspector, that your haunted manor is less supernatural and more chemical in nature." "Chemical." Holmes gave a thin smile. "And the sneezing is not what it seems." As we returned toward the house, a sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, and once again the strange sound echoed out clearer, this time "Achoo, ehu." Watson felt the hair on his neck rise. Holmes, however, only narrowed his eyes. "The house sneezes," he said under his breath. "But what illness?" And with that, we stepped inside the house that sneezed. Chapter 2. The client who didn't knock our return to Baker Street was delayed by the weather and by Holmes' insistence on collecting some cloth, even a chipped piece of plaster from the interior of the house. Though he shared little with me at that time, I observed a tautness in his manner, as though something about the case had disturbed even him. That, more than any clue or ghostly sneeze, told me we were dealing with a riddle most abnormal. It was the morning after our return, and I was still nursing a chill and a dozen unanswered questions when Holmes spoke at last. "There are 3 possibilities," he said, pacing before the fire. "Either Dr. Harwood was killed by an intruder no one saw, by a force no one understands, or most intriguingly by something he never saw coming himself." "And which do you favor?" I asked. He looked at me over the rim of his teacup. "I favor whatever the evidence insists upon, Watson. Speculation is the luxury of the idle." Before I could reply, our door creaked open, not with the usual knock or announcement, but gently, hesitantly. A figure stepped inside, soaked by the rain and bundled in a heavy velvet cloak. Her face was obscured by a dark netted veil. "I apologize," she said, her voice trembling, "but I could not trust myself to wait another moment. I had to come at once." Holmes did not seem surprised. "Miss Lydia Harwood," he said evenly, "sister to the late Dr. Ernest Harwood, formerly of Queen's College, Cambridge, and owner of Worsley House. Welcome." The woman flinched. "How did you? Your gloves bear a faint impression of surgical thread looped, not knotted, indicating you recently closed a physician's bag. Your coat's hem is frayed with moorgrass unique to Suffolk. As for your surname, it's embroidered quite delicately on the handkerchief you are clutching." She looked down and gave a short, sad laugh. "I see the tales are not exaggerated." Holmes gestured to the seat across from him. "Please, you have come about your brother's death." Miss Harwood nodded, removing her veil. Her face was pale, though not weak, strong brows, wide, intelligent eyes, a mouth that held itself rigid as if practiced in grief. "Inspector Lestrade wrote me of your involvement," she said. "I do not believe in ghosts or moaning walls, Mr. Holmes, but I believe something monstrous occurred in that house." "Monstrous is a vague term," Holmes said. "You must be precise." She inhaled deeply. "My brother was not a well-loved man. Brilliant, yes. Generous with his time, but not with his affections. He quarreled frequently with his housekeeper, with our cousin Frederick, even with the village vicar over some scientific dispute I never quite understood. But he was never afraid of his house. He liked its silence. Was he suffering from any condition? Respiratory? Cardiac? No," she said quickly. He had been quite healthy. He walked the grounds each morning, kept a strict diet. I do not believe he was ill." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, what struck you most about the body?" I frowned, recalling the scene. No sign of trauma, no struggle. It was as though he had simply ... stopped. "Exactly." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And yet the house gives off that sound, a rhythmic, mechanical wheeze. Miss Harwood, has anyone ever complained of odd sensations while inside the manor? Itches, sneezing, difficulty breathing?" She blinked. "My brother would often write of unruly damp, said it clung to his books. He had the study windows sealed last winter." "Sealed?" Holmes leaned forward. "No ventilation?" "None, except for the chimney, I suppose." Holmes' eyes lit faintly. "Did your brother keep visitors often?" She hesitated. "Rarely. Only a few regular callers. His man of business, a chemist named Mr. Vale, and cousin Frederick." "Mr. Vale," Holmes repeated softly. "He runs the apothecary in Ipswich. They collaborated often. And this Frederick?" Her lips thinned. "Frederick Harwood. A cousin on our father's side. My brother gave him a small inheritance last year. Frederick squandered it and asked for more. They argued over money last month, quite bitterly, I'm told." Holmes nodded. "Thank you, Miss Harwood. I believe your visit has clarified several shadows. But you still do not know what killed him," she said quietly. Holmes stood. "On the contrary, I suspect what killed him, and if I am right, it was not a ghost, nor a man, but a substance." As Miss Harwood departed, Holmes turned to the window and watched the rain fall. "Watson," he murmured, "there is a silent killer inside that house, and it is not done yet." Chapter 3. The First Clues. A scene of deception we returned to Worsley's house 2 days later, just as the fog lifted from the Suffolk moors and the villagers had resumed their cautious routines, though none would come within 50 yards of the estate. The manor remained undisturbed since our last visit, save for the local constable who guarded the grounds from a distance, lantern in hand and nerves fraying by the hour. Holmes walked ahead of me along the cobbled path, his coat flaring behind him like a raven's wing. He was uncharacteristically silent. I recognized the look in his eyes, a private calculation turning endlessly behind the veil of his reason. The constable, a lanky fellow named Griggs, met us at the gate. "No one's entered since you left, sir," he said nervously, "and the sneezing it hasn't stopped." Indeed, the house emitted its strange breath-like achoo as we approached, the sound carrying faintly through the stone. Holmes paused, his head tilted. "It's timed," he murmured. "Intervals of 26 seconds. Mechanical, most certainly. But to what purpose?" We stepped inside. The air was cold and still, yet not oppressive. Dust lay thick across the furniture, undisturbed since Dr. Harwood's death. Holmes removed his gloves and touched the banister lightly. "Watson, observe. No drag marks, Whoever removed the body did so with considerable care, almost reverence." I glanced around, and yet the room still feels watched. Holmes ignored the comment, moving swiftly through the corridor until we reached the drawing room, the site of the death. The room was modestly furnished, a velvet armchair near the fireplace, a small writing desk with an ink blotter, and a side table upon which sat a tarnished silver teapot, 2 cups, one half drained, and a plate with a single untouched biscuit. Holmes moved straight for the chair. "Here," he said. "This is where Harwood sat when he died. Look at the rug." I leaned in. There was a faint indentation just under the chair legs, barely noticeable, but definite. "He had not moved for some time," Holmes said, "long enough to sink gently into the carpet. And yet, no papers on the desk, no writing, no fire." He bent to examine the teacup, sniffed it, then dipped a fingertip inside. "Cold. The cup is cracked at the rim-thin hairline, and the spoon out of place. It's from another set entirely." He turned to the second cup, untouched. "Who was the guest?" I blinked. "You think someone joined him?" Holmes said nothing, but returned to the hearth. He crouched, lifting a few soot-stained logs. There was no fire lit, yet faint smoke residue lingers here. He scraped the brick with a small blade and placed the sample into a vial. "This soot is infused with some compound, slightly sweet in scent. Could it be arsenic?" I asked. "No, too gentle. Something more modern, possibly industrial." He rose and examined the walls. One panel, near the skirting board, bore a strange dark patch, circular and faint, as if heat had been applied. "What do you make of this, Watson?" I stepped closer. "A burn mark, but ... indirect. Perhaps steam." "Perhaps," Holmes murmured. Just then, the sound returned. "Aha-chew." It was louder here, reverberating through the room like a gust of wind escaping a tight pipe. Holmes froze, cocking his head. Then, with sudden energy, he turned and followed the sound to the far wall. A bookcase stood there, filled with dusty tomes and leather-bound scientific journals. "Help me move this," he said briskly. Together we shifted the heavy shelf aside, revealing a narrow brass panel embedded in the wall no wider than a ledger book. "A vent," Holmes said. but not for air. Something else. He reached into his coat and produced a small metal device, which he placed against the panel. It emitted a quiet hum, a breathing mechanism, he murmured, driven by pressure or timed release. I'd wager this house has more of these. To what end? I asked. Holmes tapped the panel. That is precisely the question. But if Harwood died quietly in this room, and the house continues to breathe as though something remains, then we are not merely dealing with a murder. He straightened, eyes narrowing. We are dealing with a design. As we exited the drawing room, Holmes paused at the threshold and turned back. The stage was arranged, Watson, not by chance, nor by rage. Every detail in that room was curated for an audience, and we have not yet met the playwright. Chapter 4: The Gathering of Suspects by Holmes had finished his meticulous sweep of the manor, leaving behind a series of chalk marks, paper scraps, and half-closed notebooks that I had long ago stopped trying to interpret. The house's wheezing rhythm continued in the background like a ghost's metronome, underscoring the sense of theatricality Holmes had hinted at. We had stepped into a play, it seemed, but who among the cast was the playwright, and who merely the audience? I've arranged for the principal players to meet us at the village inn, Lestrade informed us as we crossed the threshold into the gray Suffolk daylight. None were eager, but they've agreed. Holmes merely nodded. Let them talk. Even silence will speak volumes. The Worsley Heath Inn, a squat building of soot-stained stone and tobacco-stained curtains, held a worn dignity about it like a retired actor, half forgotten but still ready for one final performance. In the sitting room, Lestrade had gathered 4 individuals connected in some way to the late Dr. Harwood. Holmes took a chair in the far corner, leaned back, and lit a cigarette with deliberate slowness. I took my usual post beside him, with notebook in hand. Lestrade: Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. I trust you understand why we've asked you here. The first to speak was a gaunt man in spectacles and a loose gray coat. If it clears my name, I'll talk as long as necessary, he said. Edward Vale, pharmacist. I supplied Ernest with compounds for his experiments. Holmes flicked his eyes toward him but said nothing. Next was a woman, middle-aged and tightly wound in a faded black shawl. Martha Cribbs. I kept the doctor's house for 23 years, she said, her voice brittle with restrained emotion. I left his service 2 months ago. Why? Holmes asked, without lifting his gaze from the cigarette. He changed, she said shortly. Started locking doors, covering mirrors, sealing windows, and that contraption. She hesitated. The breathing. I told him it wasn't right. I begged him to take it out. Holmes nodded once and moved his attention to the third figure, an elegant man with thinning blonde hair, a plum-colored scarf tucked neatly into his waistcoat. Frederick Harwood, cousin to the late Ernest. We had disagreements, but I had no reason to wish him harm. No reason, Holmes repeated. Even after he revoked your allowance. Frederick's lips thinned. He was unkind, yes, but I'm no beggar. I have other means. I'm sure you do, Holmes replied, eyes unreadable. The last person was a young woman, seated stiffly near the fire. She had not spoken once since we entered, but her gaze had never left Holmes. Miss Elsie Wren, Lestrade said, prompting her gently. I was engaged to Dr. Harwood, she said suddenly, her voice soft but resolute. He broke it off 6 weeks ago. Said he was protecting me from something in the house that drew Holmes' attention at last. He claimed the house itself was a danger. He didn't explain, she replied, voice trembling. Only that something had changed in the walls. He wouldn't see me after that. He even stopped replying to letters. Holmes leaned forward. Did he tell you what he had been working on? No, she whispered. But he was obsessed. Said he was close to something revolutionary. He stopped sleeping. Sometimes I'd find him sitting in the dark, just listening to the walls. A mechanical obsession? Holmes asked. She nodded. Then he wasn't mad, Holmes said softly. Just far too clever for his own safety. The room fell silent. Outside, the wind scratched against the glass like a restless thought. Holmes stood. One of you knows what happened to Dr. Harwood. Another suspects. The rest may yet be innocent, but all are tangled in the consequences of that man's final days. He stepped toward the window, watching the gray mist reclaim the hills. This was not a crime of passion, he said, almost to himself. It was a slow, deliberate act, not merely to end a life, but to erase a discovery. Vale echoed. Holmes turned. Tell me, Mr. Vale, was Harwood working with chloroform derivatives or methylamines? Vale blinked. Yes, both. But how? I'll ask the questions tomorrow, Holmes said briskly. Tonight, no one leaves the village. As we left the inn, Holmes stopped suddenly and whispered to me, Watson, they are all lying, but only one is lying well. Chapter 5. First suspects, the red herring. The following morning brought with it a clarity not seen in Worsley Heath for some days. The fog had retreated, and the moorland was dusted with frost, as if the land itself had paused in breathless expectation. Holmes, however, showed no signs of resting. By the time I descended for breakfast, he had already been out and returned, boots muddied, coat damp, an expression alight with purpose. Lestrade has taken a liking to Frederick Harwood, he said without preamble, declared him shifty-eyed and entirely too charming for his own good, which likely means he's innocent. I replied dryly. Quite, Holmes said with a faint smile. Still, the cousin bears watching. His financial desperation makes him a convenient villain. But convenient, Watson, is the enemy of truth. We returned to the inn shortly before midday, where Lestrade awaited us in the parlor with an air of premature triumph. I've questioned the housekeeper, again Martha Cribbs, he said. She admitted to seeing Frederick sneaking about the property at night. Claims he came by a week before the death, shouting through the window for the doctor to let him in. Holmes raised an eyebrow. And was he admitted? No, Lestrade said. But he was seen again the next evening. Same time. Holmes turned to me. 2 visits, 2 refusals. Yet Frederick remains in the will, correct? Lestrade nodded. As far as we know, then he had motive, opportunity, and perhaps knowledge of the doctor's secret experiments. Exactly, Lestrade said with satisfaction. We'll have him in a cell by dusk. Holmes waved a hand. By all means, question him again, but do not arrest him not yet. Lestrade blinked. Why not? Because he is not a murderer, Holmes said evenly. He is a nuisance, possibly a thief. But a man who shouts through windows does not poison through walls. Before Lestrade could respond, the door opened and in stepped Edward Vale, the pharmacist. His expression was tight, his clothes neat but worn at the cuffs. "I came to speak to Mr. Holmes," he said. "Privately, if I may." Holmes motioned him in. "Dr. Watson is my constant companion. Speak freely." Vale hesitated, then sat across from us. "I have reason to believe," he began slowly, "that Dr. Harwood's death was the result of his own work." Holmes leaned forward. "Go on." Vale took a breath. He had been working on something, a form of controlled vapor release. He said it was to purify sick rooms, deliver medicine through the air. He used compounds derived from camphor, menthol, even modified nitrites. I advised him it was dangerous, but he wouldn't listen. "Did he test it?" Holmes asked. Vale nodded. "In the house. He had a whole system of copper pipes running through the walls. That sneezing sound, that's a pressure valve resetting. The vapors were meant to be timed." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "And you believe a malfunction occurred? Perhaps, or perhaps someone knew how to exploit it." There was silence. Outside, a cart rolled by, its wheels crunching over frost-bitten earth. "Why come to us now?" Holmes asked, finally. Vale's voice dropped. "Because 2 weeks ago, I delivered a sealed box to Harwood. Inside were canisters. I wasn't told what they contained, but I suspect he used them in his machine." "Did anyone else know?" I asked. "Only his housekeeper," Vale said. "She signed for the delivery." Holmes rose. "Then our next conversation must be with Miss Cribbs. We found the housekeeper in a rented cottage on the edge of the village. She opened the door with a scowl, wiping her hands on an apron. 'I already told the inspector everything,' she barked." Holmes bowed politely. "And I would not ask you to repeat yourself, only to clarify. The canisters delivered to the doctor. Where were they stored?" "In the cellar," she muttered. "He told me never to go near them." "And yet you did," Holmes said gently. She blinked. "How?" "There's a faded yellow mark on your left glove. Trinitrate solution. Harmless in that quantity, but uncommon unless handled directly." Miss Cribbs swallowed. "I didn't mean to. He was locked in his study all week. I thought maybe he'd forgotten them, so I brought them up." "When?" Holmes asked. "2 days before he died," she whispered. Holmes turned. "That is all, Miss Cribbs. But you've been most helpful." As we stepped into the chill air again, I turned to Holmes. "So Vale's delivery system backfired. An accident?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson. Accidents don't lock doors. And they don't target only the one man in the house." He looked back at the cottage. "No. The killer used Harwood's own invention against him. The question is, who knew how it worked?" Chapter 6. The Diary of a Forgotten Maid. The ticking of the mantel clock in Mrs. Garrison's parlor kept time with the slow unraveling of the mystery. Poirot sat in his usual stiff-backed manner, with his fingertips pressed together under his chin. Hastings, ever watchful, reclined in the opposite chair, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea. "The Diary of Lily Hemsworth," Poirot said at last, "has given us a narrow crack through which we may peer into the past." "She must have seen something," Hastings murmured. "The entries become more erratic right around the time Lady Montrose was found." Poirot nodded. "Oui, mon ami. She saw something. But what troubles me is that she did not say it outright. Why conceal the most damning details in vague entries about shadows and locked doors?" They had discovered the old diary tucked away behind a false panel in the maid's quarters. No larger than a prayer book, and written in a trembling hand. The ink was faded, the paper delicate, but its words suggested growing unease in the days leading to the murder. October 13th, Lady M had the red book again. Same spot, the library, same time. He saw her. They argued, he stormed off. She stayed behind. Something fell. Sounded like glass. October 14th. Everything was different at breakfast. Master G was pale. Lady M was absent. She said she had a headache. I heard whispering outside the conservatory, she told him. If you try to stop me again, I'll make sure everyone knows. October 15th. I don't want to write this, but I think someone is going to die. The diary ended there. Poirot closed the notebook carefully and stood. We must speak with Gregory Garrison again. The mention of the red book cannot be a coincidence. Gregory had just returned from the stables when they approached him in the hall. He looked thinner than before, worn down by the days since the murder. Mr. Garrison, Poirot began gently, we require your assistance. It concerns a certain red book mentioned by your former maid, Lily Hemsworth. Gregory froze. I don't know what that means. She kept a diary. She noted that Lady Montrose often handled a red book in the library, and that it provoked an argument with someone. Gregory looked away. That book, it was my father's, a ledger of sorts. She found it in the drawer of the old desk. She wouldn't let it go. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And why was it so valuable? Gregory's jaw tightened. It detailed some questionable dealings. Land transfers, money hidden through shell accounts, things that could ruin the family name. So Lady Montrose was using it as leverage, Hastings asked. Yes, he admitted. She wanted more money, more power. She said if I didn't support her in her fight for the estate, she'd publish it. Poirot tapped his cane against the wooden floor, his mind drawing lines between secrets and the night she died. He pressed. I confronted her. I demanded she return the ledger. She laughed in my face and called me a coward. Did you kill her? Gregory recoiled. No. I left her there, I swear. I went down to the cellar. When I returned, the study was dark, and she was already gone. Poirot looked into the young man's eyes and saw truth mixed with fear, but not murder. Later that evening, Poirot and Hastings returned to the study. The red book had not been found among Lady Montrese's possessions. If she was using it as blackmail, Hastings said, then someone else might have killed her to retrieve it. Poirot nodded. Exactly. But where is it now? He knelt by the desk drawer, the same one Lady Montrose had been seen searching. Then his eyes lit up, double quotes. Regard us. He pulled open the drawer and, with delicate fingers, tapped along the sides. A small, hollow clunk echoed from beneath. A false bottom popped loose. Inside was the red ledger. Its pages were full of dense handwriting, financial charts, and signatures, one of which belonged to none other than Lord Worthington himself. Poirot turned the book over with reverence. This is what she died for. But why would Worthington sign off on those entries? Hastings asked. Mon ami Poirot said darkly, because he had everything to lose. They now had motive, leverage, and a secret too dangerous to remain buried. But how it connected to the murder weapon, the brass letter opener, and who had handled it last, remained a shadow they had yet to illuminate. Poirot rose, eyes glinting with quiet intensity. The killer believed the book gone, he whispered. But now that we have it, The killer will have to act again. And with that, the clock struck midnight. The chase, it seemed, was just beginning. Chapter 7. The shadows beneath the attic. Dim bulb dangling from the attic's low ceiling cast eerie shadows on the boxes stacked high like coffins of forgotten time. Poirot's polished shoes clicked softly against the dusty wood as he moved with precision, careful not to disturb the resting silence. Behind him, Inspector Lestrade climbed up slowly, the beam of his torch slicing the darkness. "Strange," Lestrade muttered, sweeping the beam across a stack of old trunks. The housekeeper said this attic hadn't been touched in years. Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, mais, oui, that is what she said." And yet, he knelt beside a box marked Holiday China, 1889, and gently brushed off the layer of dust. A clean streak glared back at them. "Someone has been here recently." Lestrade crouched. "The dust has been disturbed." "Exactly." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he moved to the far wall, where a battered writing desk sat, partially hidden behind crates. "And I believe they came searching for something." He opened the drawer slowly. Inside were yellowed papers, receipts, ledger books, and a worn notebook with brittle pages. Poirot flipped through carefully, stopping at a page near the center. "Regard us." He held it up for Lestrade. "It is an inventory, but not of china or holiday decor. It is a list of names, some crossed out, some circled in red." Lestrade leaned closer. "Mary Dunlow, George Haversham, Francis Avery." His brow furrowed. "That's the second time we've seen Haversham's name. He was the solicitor who arranged Miss Elmsworth's estate." Poirot nodded. "We, and if you recall, Francis Avery's name was in the ledger we found beneath the floorboards." A silence stretched between them as the implications settled in. "These names," Poirot said slowly, "they form a chain, a pattern, a carefully hidden thread connecting people who, on the surface, appear to have no relation." Lestrade stood, scratching his head. "So what are we looking at here? A list of associates? Enemies?" Poirot's voice was low. "Certain. Victims. Or, perhaps, accomplices." Just then, a sound of faint thud code from below. Poirot's eyes flashed. That came from the second floor. Both men descended quickly, Poirot moving with unexpected speed. The landing was dim and still, but Poirot paused near the guest bedroom. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. The room was cold. The window had been forced open, the night breeze curling the curtains like ghostly fingers. A ladder leaned against the sill from outside. "Someone has been watching us," Poirot murmured, "and they did not want us to find that list." Lestrade peered out. "Damn it, he's gone." Poirot's gaze dropped to the floor. A small, metallic object lay there, button torn from a coat. He picked it up delicately. They left in a hurry. Suddenly, there was a cry from below, one of the constables. Poirot and Lestrade rushed down, reaching the grand hallway. A constable pointed toward the parlor, wide-eyed. "It's the maid, Miss Tilly. She's vanished." Poirot's brows. "When was she last seen?" "Just moments ago. She said she needed to fetch linens from the laundry. Then we heard glass breaking at the back entrance." Poirot's expression darkened. "She was the one who first spoke of Miss Elmsworth's nightmares." "No," he said. "And now she too has disappeared." Lestrade's voice lowered. "You think she was part of it? Or that she knew something?" "Both are possible. But what concerns me most, mon ami, is this sudden pattern those who get close to the truth vanish or die. He turned back to the parlor, where the portrait of Eleanor Elmsworth stared down from above the fireplace. Her eyes calm, stern, seemed to follow them. Poirot whispered, "The dead speak in whispers, Inspector, and someone is trying very hard to silence them." The air grew heavier, as if the house itself had drawn a breath and held it in fear. Lestrade asked, "What now?" Poirot's gaze shifted toward the library. "Now we search deeper. The truth is close. I can feel it. But so is danger." And with that, the great detective stepped into the shadows of the hallway once more. As a storm rolled low above the estate, thunder rumbling like distant footsteps. Chapter 8. The Hollow of Secrets. The fog thickened as the moon retreated behind a curtain of clouds, casting the landscape in a ghostly gloom. Poirot, muffled in his overcoat, followed Inspector Japp down the hillock toward the abandoned hunting lodge that Mrs. de Venish had finally disclosed. The wind whispered through the leafless trees, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. "Doesn't feel like a place where anything good ever happened," Japp muttered, stepping over a fallen log. "No," Poirot replied, his voice low. "But sometimes the places that hold the most pain also cradle the greatest truths." The lodge loomed ahead, small, decaying, its windows gaping like eyes long blinded by dust and time. Its door hung on rusted hinges. Japp pushed it open with the toe of his boot, and it creaked, a protest that echoed across the glade. Inside, the air was dry and stale. Dust blanketed the wooden floorboards, and cobwebs clung to the corners like forgotten drapery. Poirot's gaze swept the room with precision. There were signs, faint ones, that someone had been here recently. A boot print in the corner, half-used, a broken chair that hadn't yet gathered dust, and a strong scent of tobacco, fresh. Japp noticed it too. Someone's been smoking here. Not long ago either. "Indeed," Poirot said, walking toward the hearth. "And perhaps they've left behind more than ashes." He knelt beside the fireplace and inspected the grate. Tucked behind a loose brick was a tightly rolled piece of paper, slightly charred at one end. Poirot retrieved it carefully and unrolled it beneath the flickering beam of Japp's torch. It was a letter, torn in places, but enough was legible. ... He threatened to reveal everything unless we gave him what he wanted. "I told you this would happen. She never should have written it down. ... Poirot's eyes narrowed. "She..." Japp leaned in. "Who's she?" "Lady Tamsin." Poirot shook his head. "Nan, too obvious. Think, mon ami. Who benefits from a scandal hidden away? Who fears the truth, yet dances close enough to use it as leverage?" Japp blinked. "The maid Clara." "No, wait. You're thinking of the sister." Poirot didn't answer. He turned away from the hearth and scanned the room again, then stopped, staring at the far wall. A large oil painting had been removed, leaving behind a rectangular shadow. In its place, faint outlines of chalk marks remained, symbols, almost ritualistic in design. Poirot stepped closer, kneeling again. "There is something behind this wall. A compartment." He ran his fingers along the paneling and pressed gently at one corner. With a click, a section of the wood popped open. Inside was a small metal box, tarnished with age. Poirot took it out, resting it carefully on the nearby table, and unlatched it. The contents were sparse, but damning: a journal, its cover stained and cracked. A locket with a portrait of Lady Tamsin and a man Poirot didn't recognize. A sealed envelope addressed to Edgar Devenish, and a faded photograph of 3 girls in school uniforms, Tamsin, Imogen, and a third girl whose face had been scratched out violently. Poirot read the journal's opening pages in silence. When he looked up, his face was grave. "It is all here, Jap. The truth hidden beneath years of silence." He handed the inspector the photograph. "This girl, the one whose face was destroyed, she is the key. Who is she?" Poirot looked out into the night. A ghost from the past. One who tried to return and was silenced before she could. Jap pocketed the evidence with gloved hands. "I'll have the station go through birth records, school lists, anything from their academy years. If someone was erased, there will be traces." Poirot nodded. "And I shall return to the Hollies. There is one question I did not ask, Lady Imogen. A small thing, but in my experience, small things, they are never truly small." Outside, the wind had begun to howl, and the trees swayed like pendulums in mourning. Poirot pulled his collar higher and strode into the dark. Back at the Hollies, the household was quieter than usual. No one waited in the parlor. The butler, grim-faced, informed Poirot that Lady Imogen had retired early, claiming a migraine. Poirot insisted on speaking to her. When she appeared, draped in a velvet robe, her face pale beneath her crimson hair, Poirot bowed slightly. "Forgive the lateness, madame, but I must trouble you with one question." Her smile was strained. "If you must, Monsieur Poirot." He held up the photograph. "Do you remember this?" The third girl. Imogen's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes flicked to the image, then away as if it burned. Poirot stepped closer. "Who is she?" Silence. Then her name was Marianne. Marianne Vale. "We were friends once. Friends. Or something more." Imogen's composure shattered. "She was my sister. My half-sister. My father's illegitimate child. We were sent to school together, and for a while it worked. But she hated Tamsin. Said she was cruel, manipulative. I didn't believe her then." Poirot's voice was gentle. "And now?" Imogen's eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "Now I know she was right." A long pause followed. Poirot's mind clicked through the pieces. The journal, the photograph, the missing girl, and the murder. He bowed his head. "Merci, madame. I believe the end is nearly upon us." As he stepped into the hall, Poirot murmured to himself, "The truth lies not just in what is spoken, but in what one is too afraid to say." Chapter 9. The cipher in the dust. The evening grew heavy with silence, only interrupted by the occasional groan of old wood shifting under the weight of time. Poirot sat upright in the worn leather armchair in the study, his gaze fixed on the yellowed parchment spread out before him. The mysterious map taken from the compartment in the blue vase at Sedgwick Manor had proved less informative than anticipated till Hastings had knocked over a candlestick, brushing a line of soot across the edge of the paper. Beneath the soot, faint impressions had appeared, ink that had nearly vanished over the years, but now shimmered faintly. Poirot leaned closer, his sharp eyes narrowing. "A cipher," he whispered, as if speaking the word aloud might cause the letters to scatter like frightened mice. Hastings, pacing nearby, stopped and turned. "A cipher, as in a hidden message?" Poirot nodded. "It is in the style of the Vigenère cipher, but it has been tampered with." portions erased, others smudged. It was not intended for the casual reader, mon ami. He tapped the page gently with a gloved fingertip. The key lies not in the letters alone, but in the placement, the way the ink bleeds toward certain corners. Whoever wrote this knew the art of concealment well. He paused, eyes twinkling with restrained energy. I must speak to Lady Sedgwick again. Lady Sedgwick received them in her dimly lit sitting room, the curtains drawn tightly despite the pleasant dusk outside. Her posture was stiff, lips pursed as if bracing herself. "You've come to torment me with more riddles, monsieur?" she asked, voice brittle. "No, madame. I have come only to request the truth. The cipher we found hidden in your late husband's possession points to a name one I believe you know." Her eyes flicked, barely perceptible. "I don't know what you're referring to." Poirot stepped closer, softening his tone. "It is not an accusation," Lady said, "but this cipher suggests that your husband was investigating someone. Perhaps blackmail, perhaps espionage. Either way, he feared exposure, yet trusted this house enough to hide the message here." The word blackmail hung heavy in the air. Her fingers tightened on the folds of her silk dress. "He was no saint, Mr. Poirot, but whatever he uncovered, he never told me." Poirot leaned in, lowering his voice. "Then perhaps he was protecting you, or perhaps he feared what you might do if you knew." Lady Sedgwick's lips trembled. "That's absurd, is it?" Poirot said softly. "Because the cipher, when deciphered using the word shadow, reveals three things: coordinates, initials, and a date. That date coincides with the day he was killed." Hastings shifted in alarm. "You've cracked it." Poirot nodded slowly, enough to know that Lord Sedgwick was not the intended victim. Not directly. The message refers to the bearer of the crimson medallion, which he was not known to wear. But his valet, Mr. Leclerc, was. Lady Sedgwick inhaled sharply. "And yet," Poirot continued, "it was your husband who died in a study where both he and the valet were expected to be present." The room fell still. "You believe my husband's murder was a case of mistaken identity?" she asked, her voice a rasp. "No," Poirot replied. "I believe the valet Leclerc switched shifts with Lord Sedgwick deliberately. And I believe someone within this house knew that in advance." That evening, Poirot returned to his suite, his little gray cells worry in overdrive. He laid the cipher beside a set of old photographs recovered from the estate archives group, portraits from war committees, faculty dinners, and an old expedition in Egypt. Leclerc appeared in two of them, always at the edge. The same man, always the servant. Or so it appeared. Poirot studied the images, then turned to one final piece of evidence. A locket taken from Leclerc's personal drawer, shaped like a crimson sunburst. Inside was a miniature portrait not of family, but of an emblem, a symbol Poirot had seen only once before. "It cannot be," he murmured. Hastings looked up. "What is it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "My friend, I believe we have been dancing on the edge of something far larger than murder. Something international." He stood, energized. "And I believe we shall need to pay a visit to an old friend in Scotland Yard." Chapter 10. The blood under the door. Detective Blaze stood in the archway of the sitting room, his gaze heavy on the window where sunlight no longer reached. The storm clouds had thickened above the widow's estate, and the quiet of the house pressed against his ears like a held breath. Laura stood silently at the doorway, arms folded, her knuckles pale. Her composure was crumbling like wet plaster. "I need to speak to your staff," Blaze said, without turning to her. "All of them, again, but one at a time, and this time you don't interfere." Laura gave a slow nod. "They're terrified, Mr. Blaze. You might not get much." He looked at her. "They'll give me what I need." Within the hour, the house staff had been gathered again in the conservatory. Rain tapped at the glass roof like impatient fingers. Blaze began with Hannah, the young maid. Her eyes were red from crying, but she answered with less hesitation now. "No one ever liked Mr. Hartwell, sir," she whispered, "especially not after what he did to Miss Lila." Blaze's brow furrowed. "Lila?" Hannah nodded. "Miss Lila used to work here. Cook's niece. She came last spring. Mr. Hartwell, he said things, made her uncomfortable. Cook begged Laura to let her go back to the village, and then she disappeared," Hannah whispered. "No goodbye. No one said a thing, but Cookshi lit a candle every night for weeks after." Blaze made a mental note. When was this? 3 months before Mr. Hartwell died. Next was Cook. Her broad face was unreadable, her voice low. "I know what that man was," she said. Everyone did, but no one ever said it out loud. Not until he ended up in that garden, like a dog. And we all knew someone had finally said, "Enough." "Lila?" Blaze asked. Cook's eyes narrowed. "Don't bring that girl's name into this again. She's gone. The house is cursed enough." He left the room with more questions than answers. He climbed the staircase once more, this time heading toward the guest rooms on the eastern wing. Something was pulling instinct, or memory, or maybe just the scent of old lies. Halfway down the hallway, he noticed a faint smell, coppery, faint taut. He stopped in front of a locked guest room. The doorknob was cold, unyielding. He knocked. No answer. Laura had claimed these rooms were unused, closed for repairs. "Open it," Blaze said, when Laura arrived behind him, arms crossed again. She hesitated. "There's nothing in there. Old linens, dust." Blaze said nothing, just waited. She sighed and produced a brass key from her pocket. The door creaked open. The room was stale, and the curtains were drawn, casting it in a tomb-like grayness. A thin trail of something dark had dried along the edge of the floorboards, barely visible in the dim light. Blaze crouched. Blood. Old, but not ancient. "What happened here?" he asked quietly. Laura's breath caught. "I don't know. Maybe a rat. One of the cats." "There are no cats here," Blaze replied. He searched the room more thoroughly. Behind the bed's carved headboard, tucked against the paneling, he found a leather-bound ledger. No dust on it. Recently placed. Inside were lists of names and coded figures, each name accompanied by strange symbols and dates. At the bottom of a particularly worn page, LM terminated. He froze. Lila Monroe. He turned the book toward Laura. "Explain this." Her voice was almost a whisper. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before." "Then who has?" She shook her head. "I don't know. My husband had ... dealings. Sometimes he'd receive visits. Men I never knew. They came late, left before dawn. I was told not to ask questions." Blaze stood still, the weight of the book in his hands, heavy with something foul. He went back to his office that night, poring over the ledger. Names began to connect to past missing persons, cold cases, young women who vanished quietly, never searched for. Whoever kept this ledger had documented not just deaths, but transactions, trades, purchases. Blaze's stomach turned. This was bigger than Laura, bigger than Hartwell. But someone in that house had continued this ledger. Someone had added Leela's name, and someone had killed Hartwell to silence the wrong secret in the quiet of his office. Blaze picked up the receiver and called in a favor. He needed access to national missing persons databases. Something was buried in that ledger. And it wasn't just names, it was a network, and it had just cracked open. Chapter 11. The Whisper Beneath the Staircase. The evening had drawn in thick with mist, settling over London like a damp shroud. Street lamps flickered in the fog, their yellow glow barely cutting through the gloom. In the drawing room of the Pelham house, Sherlock Holmes stood facing the carved wooden staircase that led to the servants' quarters. His fingers drummed against his thigh with precise, almost rhythmic tension. "I believe," Holmes said, his voice low and clear, "that the answer to Mr. Merryweather's fate lies not in the grand rooms above, but beneath the very floor we stand upon." Lady Pelham gave a shudder. "You mean the cellar?" Holmes gave a slight shake of his head. "No, madam. There is another level, a crawl space between the cellar and the main floor. Built during the early 1700s when smugglers used the structure." Watson, having just returned from a brief walk in the gardens with Inspector Lestrade, turned with concern. "And what would drive a murderer to hide something there?" Holmes lifted a floorboard at the base of the staircase, revealing a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. To hide something they did not want found until they had made their escape, something they could not carry with them. Lestrade knelt beside him. "You think the body?" "I think," Holmes interrupted gently, "the answers are down there." Lady Pelham staggered slightly and sat, pale as bone china. "You must understand, Mr. Holmes. There are secrets in this house that even I don't know." Holmes looked at her, expression unreadable. "All the more reason to learn them now." Watson offered to go down with a lantern, but Holmes insisted on going himself. He tied a handkerchief around his nose and mouth before vanishing into the crawl space. The silence stretched long. Every creak, every whisper of shifting air seemed amplified. Then Holmes's voice echoed faintly. "Bring the inspector." Lestrade and Watson knelt and helped pull Holmes back up. In his hands, wrapped in crumbling linen, were two small journals bound in cracked red leather, and a rusted chain holding a signet ring engraved with the Pelham family crest. These were buried between two joists, held in place with wax, Holmes explained, brushing the dust off his coat. "One of them appears to be Mr. Merryweather's private journal. The other," he turned the second one over slowly, "belonged to a man named James Pelham, a name struck from family records after 1817. Lady Pelham stood slowly, hand trembling at her breast. "That name? My grandfather never spoke it. Said he was cursed, a thief, and a traitor." Holmes turned to the others. "Cursed, perhaps. But more relevantly, he had a motive. This entire affair is not just murder. It is retribution." Lestrade took the journals and nodded. "We'll have these examined tonight," Holmes added. "The chain and ring were likely left to mislead, but the real motive is deeper." Watson tilted his head. "Then what do you believe the killer wanted?" "Justice," Holmes replied grimly. or what they believed to be justice. But it is vengeance that stinks most foul. A sharp knock came from the front door. A young constable entered, breathless. "Inspector, we've found something." A man, unconscious, in the alley behind the chemist's shop near King's Cross. He matches the description you circulated. Scar on his left cheek. Holmes's eyes gleamed. At last, the phantom takes form. Lady Pelham clutched her pearls. "Who is it?" Holmes offered her a long look. "The man who claims to be George Merriweather's cousin. The same man who stood on your doorstep the night before the murder, and who vanished before morning." Lestrade barked orders and followed the constable out. Holmes, Watson, and Lady Pelham stood in silence. "Will he speak?" she asked softly. Holmes's tone was grave. "If he survives, he may say more than we expect." Watson noticed Holmes's fingers twitch again. A nervous habit, or the thrill of the chase? He wasn't sure. "What do you expect to find in those journals, Holmes?" he asked quietly. Holmes's eyes were far away now. A confession, perhaps, or a ghost reaching forward through time. Either way, we are not yet at the end, Watson. As the lamplight flickered in the hallway, and the fog pressed its damp fingers against the window pane, the house held its breath once more. Chapter 12. The flame beneath the ashes blaze stood at the edge of the cemetery. Hat tilted low against the rising wind, eyes fixed on the headstone that read, "In loving memory, Diana Morrill, 1986 to 2022. The stone had not been freshly carved, no recent disturbance of soil, no morning flowers. This wasn't a grave of the recently departed, yet her name had returned like a ghost at the edge of every whisper and clue. Ezra stood beside him, the last remnants of skepticism gone from his face. "It can't be coincidence," he muttered. "The deleted texts, the watch, her name in Gloria's diary. It all points to Diana Morrill. But how?" Blaze's voice was cold and precise. "Either she never died, or someone has been using her name to send a very specific message." Ezra crouched, brushing his fingers over the stone. "Let's say she faked her death. Who would she be now?" Blaze didn't answer at first. Instead, he stared at the old mausoleum nearby, the same one that had shown up in multiple photographs from Gloria's gallery, half hidden behind staged backdrops. He nodded toward it. "Let's find out." They moved quickly through the rusted gate and into the mausoleum. The stone doors creaked as Blaze pushed them open. Inside, a dull scent of dust and decay lingered. But there was also something newer, artificial fragrance. Too deliberate to be decay. Perfume. Blaze knelt by the left wall, where scratch marks disrupted the otherwise perfect stone. He tapped against the surface and heard it a hollow echo. With a few well-placed pushes, the wall gave way to reveal a narrow crawl space leading to a cellar beneath. They exchanged a look, both reaching for their flashlights. The air inside the hidden chamber was cooler, but pulsing with something intangible: memories, secrets, or just old crimes fermenting in silence. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes, old photo albums, and torn-out diary pages, fragments of another life. In the corner stood an easel covered with a black cloth. Blaze pulled it free. A large canvas painting stared back at them. A woman standing beside a burning tree, her face turned toward the fire. Half her face looked like Gloria, the other half unmistakably Diana Morrill. Ezra let out a low whistle. That's not just symbolism, that's confession. Blaze examined the signature in the corner. DM'd she was alive long enough to paint this, Blaze murmured. And the painting, look at the background. That same burning tree. It's not metaphor, it's location. Ezra pointed at the stack of diaries. And I bet whatever we're missing, it's in here. They worked in silence, flipping through the torn and aged entries until they reached one dated 3 months before Gloria's death. I saw her. She was standing outside the gallery, wearing that same red coat, Diana, or someone who wanted me to believe she was. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if I'm finally waking up to the truth. She didn't die, she hid, or she was taken and brought back. And if that's true, then everything I did to survive, is unraveling. Blaze closed the book slowly. Gloria believed Diana was back, and whoever orchestrated this knew Gloria's guilt enough to haunt her with it. Ezra's voice was tight. So either Diana's alive, or someone close to Gloria is trying to rip the wound open for revenge. Blaze's eyes drifted to a small silver locket beside the painting. He opened it. Inside, a tiny photo, Diana and Gloria, smiling, unbroken. The caption in faded ink read, "Sisters in truth, bound forever." The truth clicked into place, like the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle. Gloria wasn't just Diana's friend, Blaze said quietly. They were sisters. Ezra stiffened. But that was never mentioned. No, Blaze said. Because someone buried it, just like they buried everything else. The weight of it settled over them. This wasn't just about betrayal or grief. This was a legacy of lies, rewritten identities, and a sisterly bond severed by a secret so deep it had cost lives to keep it hidden. Suddenly, a soft creak echoed from above. Footsteps. Blaze flicked off his flashlight and signaled Ezra to do the same. They waited in silence. The slow tread of shoes crossing the floor above. Then, a voice, familiar, feminine, and humming a tune Gloria had painted into one of her early works. "Diana," Ezra mouthed. Blaze didn't move. His hand went to his coat pocket, fingers brushing the small recording device inside. They were close. The ghost had a heartbeat now, and before this was over, they would face her or whoever wore her face. Chapter 13. The Secrets. Beneath the lily pond, Blaze hadn't slept much. The night had been restless, his thoughts looping over the sequence of lies and strange silences that now surrounded the case like creeping vines. That morning, he skipped his usual routine and headed straight to the widow's estate. The mist had barely lifted from the garden grounds when he reached the arched gates, and the air smelled of wet grass and something more peculiar, wet paint. Martina met him in the hallway, dressed in muted gray, her voice low. "You're back early." "Another lead," Blaze nodded. "I need to see the garden. The pond, specifically." She blinked. "The lily pond." "Exactly that. Is it still drained?" "Yes, for repairs." But why? Blaze was already halfway to the back veranda, his coat trailing behind him like a dark whisper. The cracked flagstones led to the drained pond, a shallow basin of stone and moss, ringed by withered water lilies and half-dug soil. Something didn't sit right. Blaze circled the empty pool, tapping the base with his cane. Hollow. He crouched down. There, just under a layer of displaced earth, was the edge of a wood panel. His heart thudded. Pulling his gloves tight, he began digging with his hands until the full outline of a square trapdoor emerged, clearly not part of any garden blueprint. "What on earth is that?" Martina's voice came from behind him, breathless. "That," Blaze said, rising, "is the first honest secret this house has given me." With Martina watching from a cautious distance, he pulled open the hatch. A sharp, fungal scent spilled out, a mixture of old stone, damp wood, and age. Blaze pulled out his flashlight, descended carefully, and entered the earth. The narrow tunnel beneath led to what seemed to be an old servant cellar. But the walls weren't made of ordinary brick. They were reinforced with stone and lined with wooden shelves. Dozens of ledgers, notebooks, and locked chests filled the room. Some bore the initials ES, while others were marked with dates from 20 years prior. Blaze ran his fingers over the dusty bindings. These weren't just business records, they were accounts. Illicit ones. Martina stood frozen at the hatch above. "What is this place?" "Your late husband," Blaze said without looking up, "had a second life buried under your roses." He opened one of the ledgers. Inside were lists of names, times, locations, payments. Huge sums moved discreetly through what appeared to be shell companies. Every few pages, a code name appeared. Lady Dusk. Blaze's eyes narrowed. He was blackmailing people. Maybe more. These aren't just finances. They're operations. He flipped to the back of the ledger and found a note, handwritten in a jittery scrawl. "If anything happens to me, it's because I dug too deep." Lady Dusk is not just a shadow. She knows everything. Blaze looked up at Martina. She looked pale. "Who is Lady Dusk?" Blaze didn't answer. He needed to process this. Instead, he climbed out and snapped the trapdoor shut back in his office. Blaze laid out the evidence. The photos, the suicide note, the ledgers, the coded references to Lady Dusk. Somewhere in the middle of this storm of secrets stood Edith's name, tied to inheritances, to losses, and perhaps to a woman her husband feared enough to code in whispers. He dialed Cora's number. "I need you," he said, within the hour. Cora swept into the room, tossing her bag on the desk. "What did you find?" "A second life," Blaze replied, gesturing to the documents. "And maybe a reason someone wanted the widow silenced, or watched, or scared out of the country." Cora began flipping through the ledgers. "This is serious. These initials match some offshore banks I've heard of. And these names, one of them is a judge." Blaze pointed to the note. "That name, Lady Dusk, that's who's behind it all. She sounds like a ghost story. She's not. She's real and dangerous." Cora's eyes narrowed. "Then we find her." Blaze leaned back in his chair, finally allowing the weariness to show. "We're close. Closer than anyone's been. But if we go after Lady Dusk, we need to be careful." "Careful is not my favorite color," Cora said, smirking. "It better be," Blaze murmured, staring at the shadows forming against the window, "because the night just got a whole lot darker." Chapter 14. Whispers from the ledger. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, but the tension in Hercule Poirot's carriage remained thick. Across from him sat Inspector Dulac, eyes puffy with exhaustion and the dampness of frustration. The ride back from the Devereux estate had offered little rest. Poirot, as ever, remained pristine, his hat balanced precisely on his knees, a finger tapping rhythmically on his cane. "Something troubles you, mon ami," Poirot said, without looking up. Dulac sighed. "It's the sheer number of moving parts, Poirot. Lady Adeline with her lies about the ledger. Lucien with his debts. That housekeeper, Bernadette, always lurking with too much knowledge for her station. And now this forged signature in the ledger." Poirot smiled slightly. "But of course, it is when the facts appear tangled that the truth is nearest." Dulac arched an eyebrow. "You sound confident." "I am," Poirot said, adjusting his cuffs. "Because the killer, my dear inspector, has already made 2 critical errors." Before Dulac could ask what those were, the carriage came to a stop outside Poirot's temporary lodgings. Poirot stepped out and turned. "We dine at 8. After that, I believe I will require access to the solicitor's records." That evening, true to his word, Poirot summoned both Inspector Dulac and Miss Heloise Devereux to join him for dinner. She arrived, draped in navy blue, her voice trembling slightly but her posture as composed as ever. "I can't say I'm fond of dining with detectives," she said, attempting a wan smile. "But I'm guessing I no longer have the luxury of refusing." "On the contrary," Poirot said warmly, guiding her to the table. "You are here because I believe you know more than you've let on, and I no longer wish to guess." Heloise looked away. "If I knew something that would help, I'd have told you. Would you?" Poirot leaned forward. "Even if it implicated someone you loved, or exposed a secret better left buried?" She stiffened, wineglass halfway to her lips. Dulac cleared his throat. "What exactly do you think she's hiding, Poirot?" Poirot didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew a copy of the page from the ledger. "You see here," he said, tapping a signature beneath a strange expense. "Guest luncheon to 4 covers, minus 13 francs. It's dated the 17th, Poirot continued, "and signed by your late uncle himself." Except by that date, the Vicomte had not hosted any guests. More importantly, he had injured his writing hand. Heloise paled. "The forgery is clumsy. It mimics his style, but not the pressure or rhythm. It was meant to validate an entry that never occurred." Dulac leaned in. "So it was planted after the fact, to cover up a meeting one with grave consequences. You see, the guest that day was not 4, but 1, and the entry was a lie to mask a private confrontation." There was a long silence. Then Heloise whispered, "You think I forged it?" "No," Poirot said gently. "I think you knew about it, but the person who wrote that line was someone with access to both the ledger and to the Vicomte's personal stationery." Heloise's hand clenched around her napkin. "Bernadette," she said hoarsely. Poirot nodded slowly. "A loyal servant, yes, but perhaps a little too loyal. Her father once worked for the family. She's been in that house since she was a girl. That kind of history breeds possession, perhaps even resentment." "But why forge the entry?" Dulac asked. "To protect someone," Poirot said softly, "or to protect a truth she believed would destroy the family." Heloise shook her head. "I don't understand." Poirot rose and walked toward the fireplace. "Tell me, mademoiselle, you once mentioned that your uncle was, how shall we say, distant, but still very much a man of honor." "Yes, and yet, according to the will, everything was to go to Lucien, not you." She nodded. Poirot turned. "And yet, if the codicil is to be believed, everything reverted to you. Why, She swallowed. Because he learned about Lucien's gambling, about the theft. Non, Poirot said firmly. That was not the reason. That was the excuse. Silence stretched. Poirot stepped forward, voice soft but firm. The reason, mademoiselle, is that Lucien is not who he appears to be. The Vicomte discovered something that would change everything. That luncheon entry, that was the moment of confrontation. It was no guest. It was Lucien himself. Delac's voice cracked. You think the Vicomte learned that Lucien was not his rightful heir? Poirot nodded. An illegitimate son. Or worse, no son at all. An impostor, perhaps installed by someone in the family who could benefit. Bernadette's father, perhaps. Or Adeline, covering her own shame. Heloise looked horrified. Poirot sighed. And the result was murder. To protect a secret, to erase a threat, and to claim what was never theirs to begin with. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dolac opened it. A constable stood there, holding a small envelope. For Monsieur Poirot, he said. Poirot opened it, eyes scanning the contents. A slow smile spread across his lips. Ah, he said. We are close now. Trs Prochet. He turned to them. Tomorrow we visit the family archives. I believe we shall find our final piece there. Chapter 15. The mirror behind the door. Blaise stood still, staring at the strange mirror behind the heavy velvet curtain. It was oval, framed in tarnished silver, with odd etchings running along its rim, symbols, not of language, but of rhythm, like sound waves frozen in metal. On first glance, it was just a mirror. But then you noticed it didn't reflect the room behind you. He reached out slowly, fingertips brushing the glass, no reflection instead. The mirror shimmered slightly, as if a fog were trapped behind the surface. A flicker of motion appeared deep within its core, a hand, brushing past books, pulling open a drawer, then gone. Blaise stepped back. Lisa, he called softly. Come see this. She was already peeking around the door. That's not a mirror, she whispered. That's a recording. Of what? He asked. She hesitated. Of the room. From before. Blaise turned back to it. You think that's how whoever did this has been watching the house? Lisa nodded. Or, more likely, how he recorded it. They watched in silence as another flicker began. This time, a woman's figure, wearing that dark coat, opening the same drawer Blaise had found locked earlier. She slipped something inside, then turned. It was Olivia. Lisa gasped. But something was off. The footage, or whatever it was fragmented. It wasn't a linear reflection of time. It showed jumps. Olivia placing the object. Then another hand reaching for it hours later. Then another scene. A man, David Finchling, gesturing toward the wall. His face contorted in fury. And yet no sound. This is a recording, Blaise murmured. But someone has edited what shows. It's guiding us to certain moments. Lisa looked to him. Who would do that? And why? Blaise thought for a moment. Someone who wants us to see pieces but not the whole. A manipulator. Someone clever enough to keep the truth just out of reach. He turned to the small bookshelf beside the mirror. Dozens of tiny data chips were lined along the top shelf, all unmarked. Each one could be a piece of the full sequence. He picked one, slid it into a small port beneath the mirror. The image jumped now. The hallway. Olivia and Finch in whispered conversation. Finch holding something out small, glinting, metallic. Olivia recoiling slightly. Her mouth moved, forming a clear no. "Freeze it," Lisa whispered. The frame paused. "What is that?" he asked. Lisa leaned closer. "That's the same flash drive we found in the bedroom." Blaze stared at the image. "So Finch gave it to Olivia, but she didn't want it. Then how did it end up in her desk drawer?" Lisa stepped back, eyes dark. "Unless he forced it on her, or planted it later." Blaze turned toward the rest of the room, trying to recall everything that had been out of place. "This place isn't just where the secrets are kept. It's where they're rearranged." He started opening drawers. Old Polaroids, more USBs, torn letters. All of it seemingly meaningless until, like puzzle pieces, you began to see overlaps. Finch in a picture with someone Blaze didn't recognize. A letter half burned with the name Crawford visible. Crawford, the same name that had come up on the financial transfers from the earlier investigation. Then, a folder, plain, unlabeled, inside copies of Olivia's psychiatric evaluations. Lisa's voice shook. "She was in therapy for 3 years. For anxiety and trauma," Blaze muttered, scanning the lines. "And there's mention of an anonymous friend who kept contacting her. Someone from her past." Lisa reached over and pointed. "There, he won't stop sending me the files. He says it's proof of what they did, but it only makes me feel more unsafe." Blaze looked at her. "Finch." Lisa nodded slowly. "He was obsessed with justice. But maybe he didn't care how Olivia felt. Maybe he thought giving her the truth would redeem him. But instead, it pushed her deeper," Blaze said quietly. "And now, we're chasing someone who uses people's pasts like chess pieces." Lisa crossed her arms. "And that mirror, that's his board." They stood there, silent, as the mirror flickered, again showing a scene neither had seen before. A young Olivia, sitting alone, reading something on a screen, tears in her eyes. And behind her barely visible stood a man in shadow, watching. Blaze leaned closer. "Can you enhance that?" Lisa asked. He tapped a few keys. The shadow resolved slowly. As the distortion cleared, his heart skipped. It wasn't David Finch. It was someone older, taller, wearing an overcoat. Face mostly hidden, but not fully. Blaze turned to Lisa. "I've seen that man before." Her voice dropped. "Where?" "In a photo? From the widow's house. Her late husband's old friend." Lisa's breath caught. "You think he's the one behind it all?" Blaze narrowed his eyes in the mirror. "I think," he said quietly, "we just found the ghost in the walls." Chapter 16. The Shadows of the Trutha. Sun had set behind the thick curtain of fog that now smothered the Delorme estate. A crimson hue unnaturally vibrant lingered across the sky, as if nature itself had caught wind of the secrets Detective Blaze was preparing to unveil. Inside the dim parlor, the fire hissed with every drop of mist that sneaked through the chimney. Detective Blaze leaned against the mantel, arms folded, eyes fixed on Lady Corinne Delorme. She sat composed but pale, her fingers twitching nervously against her teacup. "I believe it's time," Blaze said quietly, "for you to tell me what really happened that night." Corinne looked toward the fire, her voice low and distant. "You've pieced it together, haven't you? You already know." "I know parts," Blaze replied, "but they don't all fit, not yet. I need the part only you can tell me." She set her cup down, the clink echoing ominously. "It was never about the fortune, you see. That's where everyone always looks. The money. But the truth, her voice cracked, was buried beneath years of silence. Blaise said nothing, letting her speak. Corinne took a deep breath. Henriette was not just my cousin. She was my shadow, my reflection. Every good thing I did, she made it brighter. And every mistake I made, she carried the weight for me. Blaise's expression remained unchanged, but his thoughts were racing. She took the fall for that fire in 1896. The servants blamed her. I never confessed. Father disowned her, quietly. She was sent abroad, alone. She never forgave me. And yet she returned, Blaise said gently. Yes, because I wrote her. I begged her to come back. I thought time would heal it all. But the moment she arrived, I knew something had changed in her. She wasn't just older, she was hollow, vengeful. Blaise stepped forward. You think she orchestrated her own murder? Corinne shook her head slowly. No, I think someone else did, for entirely different reasons. But she had been stirring something before she died. Old ghosts, old secrets, and it scared someone. He turned to pace the room, thinking, let's assume your account is true. Then the motive is neither money nor inheritance, but protection. Someone wanted the past to stay buried. A sharp knock on the door broke the tension. It was Giles, his coat drenched in mist. Detective, he said, catching his breath. The records from the monastery outside Ruangyu were right. The name Delorme is listed. A child born under mysterious circumstances in 1879. No mother's name, just the father's, Auguste Delorme. Corinne went pale. That child, Giles continued, was Henriette. But the monastery also notes a second child, born minutes later, a twin. Blaise turned sharply. A twin. Corinne clutched the armrest. No, that's impossible, is it? Blaise asked. Or did your father split them up at birth? Keep one here as you, as the Delorme heirescent, hide the other away. Giles laid a crumbling document on the table. The second child was listed under a foster name, Claire Moreau. That name matches a woman who worked for the household for years. As a maid, Blaise whispered the name again. Claire Moreau, the quiet one, always listening, always watching. Corinne's breath was shallow now. You mean, all this time, Claire was Henriette's twin, your twin? And with that, the fire cracked violently in the hearth. Blaise's eyes burned with realization. Claire had motive. She grew up in the shadows of both Delorme and Moreau legacies, abandoned and unnamed. Henriette's return probably reignited the bitterness, and, if Henriette threatened to reveal the truth, Claire would see her entire world collapse. She didn't just kill Henriette. She was erasing the only person who knew what she truly was. But Claire is still here, Giles said. Still in the estate. No, Blaise corrected him. She's gone. She left the morning after the murder, didn't she? Under the pretense of visiting her sick aunt in Marseille. Corinne whispered. She said it with tears in her eyes. I thought it was genuine grief. It was, Blaise said quietly. But not for Henriette, for herself. For what she had done. The silence thickened, as if the house itself had gone still. But there's one more thing, Blaise added, turning to Giles. We need to know if Claire used her real name when booking her ticket. I'll contact the station, Giles replied. Corinne stood, finally finding her strength again. Detective, thank you. Whatever happens, thank you. But Blaise did not smile. His gaze drifted once more to the darkened window. where fog swirled like ghosts trying to return to Earth. "Don't thank me yet," he murmured. "The story isn't over." Chapter 17. The fog lifts slightly. Blaze stood silently in the back of the dimly lit drawing room, watching shadows dance on the wooden walls as the oil lamp flickered. Across from him, Eleanor trembled on the edge of a faded armchair, a single tear threatening to fall but never quite escaping. Margaret sat beside her, unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on Blaze like he was the only person in the room who knew how to pull this family from the jaws of its secrets. Harvey paced near the fireplace, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You're saying there's something in the last text?" Blaze gave a slow nod. "Not the text itself, the absence of a reply. Silence can scream if you're listening." Eleanor blinked. "I don't understand." "It was a trap," Blaze said. "That text was a ghost sent to provoke him, to force a reaction. Gerald didn't take the bait, and that was his mistake. Whoever sent it was waiting for confirmation, for panic, for an escape attempt. But Gerald stayed silent. And they knew." Margaret's voice was hoarse. "Knew what?" "That he knew who it was." A long pause followed. Then Harvey slammed his hand against the mantel. "You think someone from inside this house, someone here, sent that message?" "I know they did," Blaze replied. "But they didn't use their own phone. They used hers." He turned to Eleanor slowly. The blood drained from her face. "My phone." Blaze nodded. "It was cloned, temporarily and very carefully. Enough to send a single message from a burner that looked like yours. That's why you didn't remember sending anything. You didn't. But they wanted Gerald to think you had." Harvey shot a glance at Eleanor. Why would anyone do that? To make him panic. And to implicate Eleanor if he didn't. Two birds with one carefully timed digital stone. Margaret was clutching the armrest. But who? Blaze pulled a worn sheet of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. Gerald was compiling something before he died. A list of access logs, printouts, names he was chasing, whoever was leaking private family correspondence to the press. He had nearly all the puzzle pieces, but didn't know how to place them. He laid the paper on the coffee table, pointing at the last name. And this is the one piece he never got to confront. Margaret leaned forward. Her fingers stopped halfway. Her expression curdled. "No," she whispered. "Yes," Blaze said softly. "You were feeding stories to the papers. Financial ones at first, then family scandals. Carefully chosen, not to destroy this house, but to nudge it." Harvey looked stunned. "Maggie, what the hell?" Margaret's eyes flicked to Eleanor, then Blaze. Her mouth opened and closed, like her voice had been snatched. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said finally. "I was trying to take control of my own life for once. Gerald was planning to cut me out of the will. I knew it. He told me so. Said I was reckless, said I was weak. But I wasn't going to let him ruin me." "You leaked the stories," Blaze said, voice low. "But someone else used your chaos to kill him." Margaret stiffened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you were a tool, not the hand that struck." Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and fell silent. Blaze crossed the room and pulled out a second document. Gerald had a meeting set the day after he died with a certain attorney, the kind of man who specializes in preemptive inheritance restructuring. He placed the paper in front of Harvey, and the person who scheduled that meeting under Gerald's name. Was you. All eyes turned. Harvey's face turned a ghostly shade of pale. That's a lie. Blaze didn't blink. You forged it through his assistant, paid in cash. Set the bait in motion. I was protecting the family, Harvey said sharply. Gerald was going to break it apart, piece by piece. Do you know what he told me? That he was going to give everything to a foundation. Not to us. Not to family, Eleanor whispered. So you killed him? No, Harvey barked. Then, quieter, I scared him. That was all. I just wanted him to think he wasn't safe here anymore. So he'd leave. So he'd reconsider. But he didn't, Blaze said. He stayed. And someone else decided to finish what you started. A hollow silence fell. Blaze stepped away from the table. And that's where the last piece lies. Someone else had reason to silence Gerald once and for all. Someone watching the chaos erupt from a safe distance until they saw their opening. Margaret looked up sharply. Who? Blaze's eyes narrowed. The one who knew how to clone a phone. Who had access to every member of this house's schedule. Who was always trusted, always invisible. A door creaked faintly in the hallway behind them. Blaze turned toward the sound. He knew who it was now, and he was ready. Chapter 18. The Garden of Ikasrain tapped the roof of the Lavash estate like a metronome marking the final movement of an unsung requiem. Inside the drawing room, where the remnants of legacy hung heavy in the air, Detective Blaze stood still, his posture tense. His gaze settled not on Madeline Lavash, but on the dusty floorboards beneath their feet. Let's not dance around it anymore, Blaze said quietly. You never intended to tell the truth. But your house has been talking behind your back. Madeline, sitting straight as a blade of iron, responded coolly. And what exactly has it said, detective? That your mother's death wasn't the end of a family tragedy. It was the beginning of your cover-up. Blaze turned to the portrait above the fireplace. Henry Lavash, once proud, now hollow. You saw him kill her, didn't you? Your father. The storm that night, the broken porcelain, the missing locket. A silence spread across the room like thick fog. Madeline's voice cracked. She was going to leave him, take me with her. He couldn't bear the thought of her making a scandal. She told me to run when I heard the shouting. I ran to the greenhouse and hid behind the oleander bushes. I heard the scream. Detective Blaze's tone softened. And the police came. You were too young. He paid everyone to keep it quiet, didn't he? She nodded, wiping a tear that had no warmth. When he died 10 years later, the will was clear, no questions, no secrets. But then came Lucien, a historian. He loved my mother's journals too much. Blaze placed the worn leather journal on the table. The missing pages, he found them. Her last entries, hidden behind a false back in the wardrobe. She was preparing to run. Madeline's hands trembled now. He confronted me, said he would go to the press. I offered to pay him, he laughed, said history wasn't for sale. Blaze didn't blink. So you poisoned him. Her eyes met his. No denial, just the weary acquiescence of a burdened soul. Mandrake root, Blaze said, producing the small vial from his coat pocket. Enough to mimic a heart attack. Hidden in the wine you poured during that celebratory dinner. She closed her eyes. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to preserve her dignity. You wanted to preserve the lie, Blaze replied gently. But truth always grows wild. no matter how neatly you bury it. Footsteps echoed behind them as Constable Rowan stepped in, somber and ready. Madeline stood tall despite the weight of what was coming, and offered her wrists without protest. As the cuffs closed with a cold click, Blaze turned to the window. The rain had stopped. The roses in the garden, slick with water, shimmered red under the awakening sun. Outside, the press waited. Inside, silence and justice cohabited one last time. Rowan hesitated at the door. "Sir, should we call the family lawyer?" Blaze didn't look back. "Yes, and send someone to the greenhouse. Have them checked beneath the oleander." "For what, sir?" "A child's locket," he murmured. "She buried it there the night her childhood ended." The door closed behind Madeline and the constable. Blaze lingered for a moment longer. The echo of footsteps gone. Only the wind stirred now, whispering secrets too tired to scream.